Hello, I'm Rachele Floyd. I'm the Director of Behavioral Health at Indian Healthcare Resource Center. I'm a licensed psychologist, but I am also here to talk about today my own personal experience of being a mother with children who struggle with mental illness. I'd like to start today by reading from the book of Matthew, chapter 25. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. A stranger, and you welcomed me. Naked, and you clothed me. Ill, and you cared for me. In prison, and you visited me." So my question for you today is, who are the strangers? Who are the ill and those in prison? The video we just watched talked about how mental illness is not always something that you can see. Sometimes it's hidden. We know about illnesses that we can see. If somebody has a broken leg, we can tell that person needs help, open the door for them, carry things for them. But when the illness is something that the person is carrying in their heart or in their mind, sometimes we can't tell, we can't differentiate, because mental illness does not differentiate between social classes, between races, between cultures. It's experienced throughout the world by people of all classes, of all races, of all backgrounds. So what is mental illness? According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the manual used by most mental health professionals to diagnose somebody with a mental illness, a mental disorder is a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotional regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or developmental processes underlying mental functioning. And if you're like me, your head is spinning at this point. So what I'd like to do is kind of break that up for you. So we talk about a clinically significant disturbance. We're talking about something that significantly impacts a person's day-to-day functioning. We're not talking about my mother died and I'm experiencing some sadness and some grief. Those are normal human emotions. When somebody has a mental illness, it goes beyond that. It affects their life beyond what we would expect. It affects their work, their home life, their relationships, their marriage, their family, their ability to work, their physical body, all the different areas of their lives. And we look at a disturbance in an individual's cognition. That's their thinking patterns. And it can go from, something where somebody's struggling with some depression, and so maybe they have, when they look at something or when somebody says something to them, they see negative intent in that. They view things from a negative lens, and so they're not always perceiving things as they're meant to be by the other person. There's some misperceptions in reality, all the way to the extreme end where we have somebody with a psychotic illness, and they are completely misperceiving reality. They see or hear things that aren't there, or they believe things that aren't true. A disturbance in emotion regulation. Again, I hear a lot of people throw the word bipolar around. If somebody's a little moody, they get a little excited, they get a little sad sometimes, they have bipolar disorder. When we're talking about somebody with emotion regulation difficulties, we're talking about somebody, again, at the extreme end. Somebody that goes days at a time being happy and excited, elated, no matter what's happening in the world. I had a woman in my office recently talking about how her best friend was at the hospital. And despite this, she was in the hospital bouncing off the walls, happy and excited. And she knew that that wasn't right. That's not how she should feel when your best friend is in the hospital. Or behavior that reflects dysfunction. So again, somebody that's acting erratically, unusually for that situation. In the United States, you saw up there, talked about kind of the statistics in Canada. It's very similar here in the United States. But each year, about 18% of the US adult population could be diagnosed with a mental illness. That's pretty high. That's almost 2 out of every 10 people could be diagnosed with a mental illness, is struggling with these issues that I've been talking about. And I work at Indian Healthcare Resource Center, as I talked about earlier. And What's striking is the impact that that has on the Native American population. So about 18%, as I said, of the U.S. adult population struggles with mental illness, but within the Native American population, that percentage is even higher. Each year, approximately 28% of Native Americans are diagnosable with a mental illness. So that's almost 3 out of every 10 people. 13% of children each year in our nation could be diagnosed with a mental illness. So again, a little more than 1 out of every 10 children. But by the age of 18, 48% of children will have struggled with mental illness during their childhood. That is almost half of our children who at some point will struggle with mental illness. And what is the source? I get asked about that a lot of times. People will ask me, do I think it's just moral weakness? Do I think the person, just needs to get spiritually right with God? And unfortunately, I don't think it's that simple. There's a lot of causes. The other day, just yesterday, I was in my son's therapist's office and watched a video where a woman, Nancy Murphy, was talking about how the root of all mental illness is impaired attachment. And there's been research looking at all of the different mental illnesses and being able to trace them back to that. And I thought that was very powerful. I think sometimes what we don't realize is the impact of relationships and the importance of those relationships, especially in the early years. It is really important when we have a baby that that baby is nurtured, that that baby is held, that baby is rocked when they're crying. And there's things that happen during that time and during that first year when the child learns to bond with people. They learn that the world is a safe place. They learn to trust people. They learn that people are going to help take care of their needs. They learn how to self-soothe. When I'm upset, this is what I do to calm myself down. And when you don't have that, that impacts you for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, you have difficulty with emotional regulation. You have difficulty with your perceptions and with your cognitions because the world is not a safe place. I mentioned earlier that I am the parent of children that struggle with mental illness, and that's actually the reason Denny was in my office, and I was sharing with her some of our struggles, the reason that she actually asked me to speak. My 2 oldest children were adopted from the DHS system. They were 3 and 4 when, sorry, I'm gonna start crying. They were 3 and 4 when we got them in our home. We knew from the very beginning that my son had disruptive attachment. There had been neglect, obviously, in the home when he was young. His parents were meth users and were cooking meth as well in the home. We knew that there had been significant physical abuse. By the time he was 5 months old, he had shown up at the hospital with a broken arm. They claimed they didn't know how it happened. When they did x-rays, they found multiple breaks throughout his body that had been healed, and they never received treatment for. Although my son has been in a loving, caring environment for the last 9 years with 2 parents that love him and 3 sisters that care and love about him, grandparents, extended family that is all very accepting, he continues to struggle with difficulties with controlling his anger, believing that people are out to get him, that people want to harm him. If we say no about something, it is an immediate anger response. Why are you keeping me from doing something fun? And it came to a head recently, and we had to have him admitted to a local psychiatric hospital because he was a danger to both my husband and I. He was physically aggressive. He hit my husband with a baseball bat. And to our other 3 children in the home. Unfortunately, while he was at the psychiatric hospital for 3 months, he received some benefit. He received some medication, which was helpful to him, but there was also harmful things that occurred while he was there and more trauma that we are now going to have to deal with the rest of his life. My son had never been in a physical altercation other than to try to harm my husband and I, who of course have not fought back. He has since been in multiple fights at the facility. My children, we do not cuss in our home, and I won't say I never do. If I get upset, sometimes something will slip. But he has then been exposed to all kinds of words and language that had never come out of his mouth before, that when he is angry, I can't believe the things he is saying. He learned that not only from the other patients there, but unfortunately from the other staff. He told me the other day when we were riding in the car, he's since come home, that if I were running that facility, most of the staff would have been fired. I said, "You know your mother pretty well." While he was at the facility, he was exposed to M&M videos of gang violence, killing, blood. My son had never been exposed to this kind of violence. It was shown to him by a staff member on her iPhone, over and over and over again, so much so he can sing you all the lyrics. He watched movies that we would never allow in our home. This is a home for children with extreme emotional disturbance, violence. Most of them are socially much younger than they are. We recently had some neuropsychological testing done with my son. He's 12 years old. He's intellectually at a 12-year-old or above. He does really well. He does really well in school. Socially, he's at about a 6-year-old level. They were watching The Dark Knight. They were watching other videos. They claimed they were PG-13 movies. When I went to look at them, and if you haven't found Common Sense Media, I would highly recommend that. It's a website you can go to see why things are rated certain ways. And I've checked on the movies that he was watching, and they certainly were not the types of things that we would allow in our home. Like I said, extreme violence, full female nudity. For school, instead of reading books or learning about things, they watched Forrest Gump, which I haven't seen in a long time, but is rated R. And I know I've had a lot of people quite shocked that that's what they were doing for school. And they watched a number of other movies. I know I'm kind of running out of my time here, but I'm going to kind of get to why this is important. And as I was talking with Denny that day in my office, we were talking about what are the needs in this community. And one of the needs from my own experience is the need for inpatient treatment facilities for youth where you have staff who are being positive with the children, who are positive mentors, positive role models, where children are being exposed to media that has a positive message, where language that is used is loving and supportive, where the activities throughout the day are designated to actually be therapeutic for children who have difficulties with attachment and difficulties with aggression and with their own emotional regulation. And we need facilities where people can access these. I know for us, we had insurance, and we were very lucky to have that because it was $14,000 every 2 weeks. Most people I know, including myself, if we had had to pay for that out of pocket, could not have afforded that. I work at an agency where most of our patients are below the poverty level. They cannot afford that kind of treatment. If they don't have Medicare or they don't have Medicaid, then we can't get them the resources that we need. So we need facilities where the care is good and that are accessible to all people. I also want to touch briefly on historical trauma, and I know you're going to hear later about Native Americans. But it's not just the impact of our own parents, our own early childhood development that impacts our growth and our development as adults. But when we look at the Native American population and populations similar throughout the world, there has been many years for Native Americans, 500 years, of being victims of genocide, forced removal, rape, and countless atrocities. Imagine being stripped of your language, being told that you can no longer speak English or whatever is your native language, being stripped of your land, taken away from your home, being stripped of your religion, told that you can no longer pray to your God, being stripped of your culture, everything you know and believe about yourself and your people, having your hair cut. I know for me, I've always had my hair long. All of a sudden to come in and have somebody else shave it would be traumatic. Being stripped of your family ties, being ripped away from your parents as a child and sent to boarding school and not allowed to see them, sometimes for years on end. And being stripped of a way to provide for your family, so that no longer can you go out and hunt, make sure that your family has food and clothing and shelter, but instead you have to go and beg for the government. And although most of these things are no longer occurring, the impact of them has continued. When you have one generation that doesn't know how to parent because they were ripped away from their parents and sent to a boarding school where they were abused, both sexually, mentally, and physically, and you grow up and you try to parent your children and you don't know how to, so you turn to alcohol and drugs, those children then grow up and they again don't know how to parent, don't know how to control their own emotions, struggle with depression, bipolar, and other mental illnesses, and that goes on for many generations. This is what many Native Americans are struggling with, and the reason that there is such a high rate of mental illness and drug and alcohol abuse within the Native American population. So really quickly, what are the needs within Tulsa for the mentally ill? As I've mentioned, we have a need for more bed space, positive facilities for children who need inpatient care. We need more facilities for adults who need inpatient care. I know Denny and I struggle very frequently with what do we do if we have an adult who is telling us that they are going to kill themselves and they have the means and the access and they're planning to do it. If this person doesn't have insurance, our ability to send them someplace is very limited. I know of one agency I can send them to in the Tulsa area, and they've frequently been turned away, despite the fact that they were in my office an hour earlier telling me that they were going to kill themselves and they have the pills to do it. But when you have a facility that's understaffed, underpaid, they don't have the resources either. So to open up another facility where we could meet the needs of adults as well as children. We also have a need in terms of outpatient treatment. I know at my facility, we struggle, again, because we don't have the funding. I keep going to my administration over and over and over. We laugh about it now, because every time it comes up, probably at least once a week, I say, I need another psychologist. Currently, we have a waiting list of 6 months to get in for psychological testing. And I know I have the doctors frequently come to me and say, but I have this person that has dementia. I need them tested so I can get them into a nursing home. I'm sorry, it's going to be 6 months. Or I have this child who has a learning disability. They're struggling in school. I need them tested so that they can get on an IEP and we can get them on the right course in school. I'm sorry, it's going to be 6 months. Or I have a parent who's had their child removed to DHS. They're doing everything they're supposed to do. They've gone to these parenting classes. They've changed the behavior that they're supposed to change. They've made their home safe. But they need a psychological evaluation before the court will let them have their children back. I'm sorry, it's going to be 6 months. The problem is the funding. There is no funding or very little funding out there for mental health treatment. So as you're thinking about today, kind of what are the needs, what can I do? Those are some of the things to think about the people whose illness you cannot see, but who desperately need the help so that we can stop the continuation of mental illness and these struggles from generation to generation. Thank you very much.